Imagine a moment so raw, so charged with unspoken pain that it alters the course of a man's life forever. In the merciless blaze of the Arizona Territory, 1873, where the sun scorches both earth and soul, Jake Morrison found himself at such a crossroads. His hands, stained with blood not his own, bore the weight of a choice that could either crown him a hero or bury him beneath the desert's unyielding sand. A man's name here could be a death sentence, sharper and swifter than any gunshot, and Jake's had just shifted in a way that would echo through the frontier, whether as a ballad of glory or a whisper of doom remains to be seen. Just 3 days prior, Jake was a mere shadow drifting across the rugged landscape, a wanderer with a weary horse and boots so tattered they barely clung to his feet. He was the kind of soul townsfolk overlooked, a fleeting figure in the dust of the territorial frontier. Yet, fate has a cruel way of seizing the forgotten, doesn't it? What he saw in those fleeting days would carve itself into his memory, a haunting vision to stalk him through every restless night. Bitter Creek, the town he stumbled into, festered like an open sore in the valley, hemmed by jagged red rock that seemed torn apart by some primal fury of the earth itself. Its main street, a pitiful stretch of compacted dirt, was flanked by sagging wooden structures that moaned under the relentless desert gusts. The saloon's doors dangled askew, and the general store's facade was scoured bare by years of brutal sand and sun. Jake rode in on his gaunt mare, Duchess, her ribs stark against her faded coat, his own hunger gnawing at him after 2 days of nothing. With scant coins jingling in his pocket, survival was a gamble. And then he saw her, Sarah Chun, though her name was yet a mystery, a figure who would soon redefine his very existence. Continuing from the dusty streets where tension simmered beneath the unrelenting sun, Jake's gaze was drawn to a woman sweeping the front steps of what appeared to be a weathered boarding house. Her motions were brisk, almost defiant, as if challenging the suffocating heat that draped the town in a heavy haze. Her raven black hair, pulled back with a faded blue ribbon, framed a face marked by quiet determination, while her worn brown dress, though patched and faded, bore the dignity of careful mending. There was an unspoken resilience in her posture, a strength that seemed to defy the desolation of this forsaken edge of the territory, and it tugged at something deep within Jake. But then, a chilling shadow fell over his thoughts. Across the street, on the sagging porch of a saloon, 3 men lounged with a menacing air. Their eyes, sharp and hungry, were locked on the woman Sarah, as Jake would come to know her, with a predatory intent that made his stomach twist. The biggest of them, a hulking figure with a tangled black beard and arms like gnarled branches, spat a stream of tobacco into the dirt, muttering something that drew harsh, guttural laughter from his companions. That sound, oh, how it grated on Jake's nerves. He'd seen that same vile gleam in countless frontier towns, the look of men who thrived on power, convinced they could seize anything, anyone, without fear of retribution. And in most godforsaken places like this, weren't they often right? Dismounting his mare, Duchess, Jake secured her reins to the hitching post outside the general store. His attention split between Sarah's oblivious diligence and the trio's sinister watch. Was she truly unaware of their gaze, or had she grown numb to such threats? Neither thought brought him any comfort. Stepping into the store's dim, cool interior, a blessed reprieve from the scorching day, he found an elderly man behind the counter. Wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose, his face etched with lines carved by years under the desert's merciless glare. Samuel Wright, as Jake would soon learn, was the keeper of this humble outpost, a man whose weathered visage hinted at untold stories of survival. Following the weary silence that had settled between them, the air in the old store standing since before Arizona was even a whisper of a territory hummed with unspoken tension. Samuel, the weathered shopkeeper, fixed Jake with a measured gaze, his tone cloaked in the cautious reserve of frontier folk sizing up a stranger. "Can I help you with anything, friend?" he asked, his words steady as the creak of the floorboards beneath them. Jake, dust-worn and resolute, slid a handful of tarnished coins across the battered wooden counter. "I'm hunting for work," he said, his voice low but firm, "and whatever supplies these might cover, if they stretch that far." Samuel's sharp eyes roamed over Jake, lingering on the polished gleam of the Colt 45 at his side, the unyielding posture, and the bone-deep exhaustion etched into his features. Out here in the raw edge of the frontier, a man's survival hinged on reading another's character in a heartbeat. One wrong judgment could mean a shallow grave. "Depends on the work you're after," Samuel replied, his hand dipping behind the counter to retrieve a jar of hard candy, the glass glinting faintly in the dim light. "Ranching's thin right now. With this cursed drought, most herds have been pushed north or sold for pennies." Jake gave a grim nod. The truth, no surprise. That relentless drought had hounded him through 3 territories, leaving behind cracked earth, empty rivers, and forsaken homes. His gaze shifted to the window. "What about those 3 out there?" he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "They from around here." Samuel's face clouded over, his eyes darting to the street before he answered, his tone heavy. "The Maddox brothers, Caleb, Seth, and Thomas. They ride for Marcus Blackwood, who owns the biggest spread in these parts. Been stirring up grief for months now." "What kind of grief?" Jake pressed. But before Samuel could reply, a clamor of harsh voices sliced through their exchange. Jake stepped to the window, his jaw tightening at the sight. The Maddox brothers had slunk across the street, closing in on Sarah Chun with predatory intent. Caleb, the hulking eldest, barked words while his kin loomed like jackals circling a lone deer. Sarah, no longer sweeping, gripped her broom handle as if it were a spear, her knuckles pale with defiance. How could such brazen cruelty unfold in broad daylight? As the tension hung heavy in the air from the previous moment, Samuel's voice dropped to a hushed murmur as he stood beside Jake at the window. "That kind of trouble," he confided, his words laced with concern. "They've been harassing Sarah for weeks now. She and her uncle manage that boarding house down the road, decent folks, the kind who toil endlessly, always fair, never stirring up a fuss. Yet those brutes seem to believe that kindness is an invitation to prey on them." Jake didn't linger to hear the rest of Samuel's grim tale. His blood surged with a quiet fury as he strode toward the door, his hand instinctively brushing the worn grip of his revolver. Samuel's cautionary shout echoed behind him, but it fell on deaf ears. Jake's mind was already made up. The scorching desert sun slammed into him as he stepped onto the porch, a brutal wave of heat that could have staggered a lesser man. Yet his gaze was locked on the disturbing scene unfolding across the dusty street. There stood Caleb Maddox, looming over Sarah with a predatory closeness that forced her to tilt her head back just to meet his cold stare. His brothers flanked her, their positions calculated to block any chance of retreat. "Come now, sweetheart," Caleb drawled, his voice slithering across the street like a viper's hiss. "You've played coy long enough. Isn't it time you showed a little gratitude for the protection we've so generously offered?" Sarah's response was resolute, her voice unwavering despite the tremble in her stance. "I don't want your protection. I've told you to leave me be." Seth Maddox, a wiry figure with jittery eyes and a grin stained yellow, let out a harsh cackle. "Oh, she asked so sweetly, didn't she, boys? But asking doesn't mean getting, does it?" Jake advanced with deliberate steps, the faint jingle of his spurs stirring the dust. Thomas Maddox, the youngest of the trio, flicked a wary glance his way, but Jake's face remained a mask of calm, betraying no hint of the storm brewing within. He knew from hard-earned experience that the most effective way to handle wolves like these was to seem harmless until the moment it was far too late. How could he stand by while innocence was cornered? The very thought gnawed at his soul. As the tension simmered from the previous encounter, Jake sauntered forward under the scorching sun, his demeanor as calm as a summer breeze. Tipping his hat with a warm nod, he greeted, "Afternoon, folks. Quite a blistering day, wouldn't you say?" Caleb, his face etched with aggravation, pivoted sharply, his heavy brow furrowing deeper. "This ain't your business, outsider. Move along," he growled, his tone a clear warning. Jake, undeterred, kept his voice light, almost neighborly. "I intend to, friend. Just thought I'd inquire with the lady here if she knows where a fellow might find some decent work in these parts. Word is this town's a haven for those with honest hearts." The word honest hung in the air like a challenge, and Jake noticed the subtle shift as the Maddox brothers' hands twitched toward their holsters, their unease palpable. Yet Jake pressed on, stepping closer, positioning himself as a barrier between Sarah and the looming threat. "You see, I've roamed through countless territories of late," he mused aloud, his voice steady as bedrock. "And I've observed something peculiar. Towns brimming with kind, welcoming souls are often the safest harbors for a weary traveler to rest and spend his coin. Isn't that a curious truth? How does such harmony come to be? Caleb's expression darkened, a storm brewing in his eyes, and Jake sensed the tipping point words were no longer enough. Having deciphered the language of violence through years of hard experience, Jake was poised as Caleb's hand darted for his gun. Time seemed to slow, each heartbeat echoing with deadly precision. Before Caleb could grasp his weapon, Jake's revolver slid from its holster, fluid as a whispered secret, the hammer's click piercing the stifling quiet. "I'd ponder your next step with great care," Jake warned, his once friendly cadence replaced by an icy edge. How swiftly a moment can turn from peace to peril. The tension hung heavy in the air, a palpable silence wrapping around the trio and Jake, as if the very street held its breath. In that fleeting stillness, Jake could hear the frantic drumming of his own heart, a stark contrast to the distant bark of a restless dog and the eerie clatter of a shutter swaying in the wind against the old boarding house. The Maddox brothers stood rooted to the spot, their hands hovering near half-drawn weapons, their faces etched with disbelief. They hadn't anticipated such fierce defiance from a solitary wanderer. It was Thomas, the youngest of the three, who shattered the quiet. "Do you even know who you're crossing, mister? We ride under Marcus Blackwood's banner, and he doesn't look kindly on those who meddle with his crew." His voice carried a warning, but Jake's response was unflinching. "I couldn't care less about your boss. What burns in me is the sight of a woman harassed when she's made her wishes crystal clear. So, what'll it be, boys? Ride out now, or shall we finish this dance right here in the dirt? I'm game either way." Caleb's gaze simmered with fury, yet behind that fire, Jake spotted a flicker of doubt, a cold calculation. 3 against 1 should have been a simple victory, but Jake's lightning-fast draw had shifted the balance, and his steady posture whispered of battles fought and survived. "This isn't the end, stranger," Caleb growled at last, his hand retreating from his gun with deliberate slowness. "You've just earned the wrath of the most dangerous man in these parts." Jake's lips curled into a faint, defiant smirk. "Wouldn't be my first rodeo." As the Maddox brothers retreated to their mounts and thundered out of town, leaving a gritty veil of dust in their wake, Jake finally eased his pistol back into its holster. Only then did he turn to Sarah, her hand still gripping the broom handle with a desperate, trembling strength. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of gratitude in the heavy air. In that fleeting moment, a mere whisper of thanks carried a weight that gripped Jake's heart with an unexpected force. "Ma'am," he murmured, tipping his hat once more in a gesture of quiet respect. "I'm Jake Morrison." Her reply came softly, "Sarah Chun." And he couldn't help but notice the tension in her hands beginning to ease, as if his presence offered a fragile shield. "You likely saved my life just now, Mr. Morrison." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, leaving Jake momentarily at a loss for a response. Before he could muster a reply, Samuel Wright materialized at his side, having crossed the dusty street with a nimbleness that belied his years. "Boy, you've got more grit than good sense," Samuel remarked, though a thread of admiration wove through his gruff tone. "Those Maddox brothers don't forgive, and their boss has a memory longer than a winter night. You've just branded yourself a target clear across 3 counties. Jake merely shrugged, his jaw set. "A man's got to face his own reflection. I couldn't just stand there and watch. What he left unsaid, what he couldn't quite name even in the privacy of his thoughts, was the pull he felt towards Sarah Chun. It wasn't only her raw bravery against those vile threats that stirred him, but something deeper, a rare, luminous strength he'd glimpsed in only a handful of souls during his restless years. What was it about her that struck such a chord within him? Breaking the silence, Sarah spoke again. "Well, if you're in need of work, my uncle could use a hand at the boarding house. The pay's modest, but it comes with meals and a roof over your head." Jake paused, weighing her words. He'd meant to leave Bitter Creek behind at the first light of dawn, yet something in her offer tugged at him. Perhaps the promise of steady food, or perhaps something far less tangible. "That's mighty kind of you, Miss Chun, especially since we're strangers," he said, his voice low with genuine surprise. Her gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "You just risked everything for someone you didn't even know." How could she not extend a hand in return? As the echo of their initial exchange lingered, Sarah's words seemed to pierce deeper than any polished reference ever could. "That speaks volumes about your spirit," she had said, and with that, an unwritten page turned, marking the dawn of a pivotal era in Jake Morrison's life. Neither he nor Sarah could have foreseen the tempest of events that loomed just beyond the horizon in the coming days. Nestled in the rugged heart of Bitter Creek, the Chun family boarding house stood as a testament to resilience. This two-story haven, crafted with a meticulous hand, rose above the haphazard structures around it. Its timber, though kissed by time and weather, held firm, and the shutters gleamed with a vibrant blue, a defiant splash of hope amidst the muted browns and grays of the town. Behind the house, a modest garden thrived, its orderly rows of vegetables a quiet rebellion against the harsh, unforgiving climate. Sarah's uncle, Henry Chun, carried the weight of his 50 years with a quiet dignity. His sharp, discerning eyes and the rough, calloused hands told tales of relentless toil. 2 decades prior, he had ventured west during the fervor of the California gold rush. Yet unlike the throngs chasing fleeting fortunes in the dirt, Henry's shrewdness led him to a different path. Serving the miners proved far more lucrative than wielding a pickaxe. As he guided Jake to a modest, spotless room on the upper floor, Henry's voice cut through the stillness. "Sarah mentioned you faced down the Maddox brothers. Brave, yes, but reckless too. Those men hold grudges, and their master is a foe you do well to avoid." Jake, placing his worn saddlebags on the thin mattress, Aranistis, met Henry's gaze. "I've heard as much. But a man doesn't choose his adversaries, only how he stands against them. Isn't that the true measure of his worth?" Henry scrutinized Jake for a long, heavy moment before giving a slow, thoughtful nod. "You've the bearing of someone who's stared down trouble before." Jake offered no reply to that. His past a shadow he kept closely guarded. Following the unspoken secrets he chose to guard deep within, Jake shifted the conversation to the tasks awaiting attention at the boarding house. As the days unfolded, he slipped into a rhythm that felt unexpectedly soothing to his restless spirit. Each morning, he dedicated himself to mending splintered boards, patching up stubborn leaks in the roof, and strengthening the corral where the horses kept for the guests pawed at the earth. By afternoon, his strength was lent to Henry, tackling the burdensome chores of the establishment, hauling buckets of water and splitting logs with a steady, determined swing. Yet it was the evenings that truly captured Jake's heart. As the sun dipped low, surrendering its fierce heat to the tender embrace of twilight, and the first shy stars blinked into view, Sarah would settle on the front porch. With a steaming cup of coffee or tea cradled in her hands, she gazed out at the tranquil street, savoring the gentle coolness of the night. At first, Jake joined her out of lingering wariness, his eyes scanning for any sign of the Maddox brothers' return. But soon, it was her presence that drew him there, a quiet comfort he hadn't known he craved. Sarah Chun stood apart from anyone he'd encountered in his years of wandering. Her mind, sharpened by the teachings of missionary tutors, brimmed with knowledge and bold perspectives on matters most frontier women scarcely pondered. One evening, as they watched a dust devil whirl down the desolate main street, she turned to him with a question that lingered in the air like a challenge. "Do you believe this will ever transform?" she mused, her hand sweeping toward the ramshackle cluster of worn buildings and barren lots that form Bitter Creek. Did she mean the lawlessness, the brutal creed that strength dictated right, where the mightiest man shaped everyone's fate? Jake pondered her words with grave intent, knowing frontier towns teetered on a fragile edge, either blossoming into order with the arrival of good souls or succumbing to chaos under the iron fist of the ruthless. As the echoes of the past section lingered, the conversation between Sarah and Jake deepened under the fading light of dusk. Some towns, Jake mused aloud, found a semblance of order, while others spiraled into chaos, untamed and perilous, until the very resources that birthed them withered away, leaving nothing but ghosts. "It all hinges on the people," he concluded with a weighty sigh. "And whether they've got the courage to fight for justice, even when the odds are stacked against them." Sarah's gaze met his, her eyes a mystery he couldn't unravel. "Is that why you intervened with the Maddox brothers that day? Because it was the right thing to do?" she asked, her voice soft yet piercing. Jake hesitated, then confessed, "Partly, but mostly I couldn't bear the thought of them laying a hand on you." His words floated in the cool evening air, heavier than he'd meant them to be, betraying the raw emotion he'd long kept buried. How could Sarah, with just her quiet presence, unravel the walls he'd so painstakingly erected during years of lonely drifting? Before she could reply, the rhythmic thud of hooves shattered the moment, Jake's hand darted to his revolver as he stood, only easing when he recognized Deputy Tom Hartwell, Bitter Creek's sole guardian of the law. Hartwell, not yet 30, carried an air of unshakable conviction, a belief that righteousness would triumph. His badge gleamed with pride, and though his firearm bore the marks of diligent care, it seldom left its holster. Dismounting, he greeted them with a nod. "Evening, folks. Jake, could I have a moment?" Descending the porch steps, Jake sensed the tension coiled in the deputy's frame. "What's on your mind, Tom?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "It's about the incident with the Maddox brothers a few days back. Words reached Marcus Blackwood, and he's far from pleased with what happened to one of his own." The sting of public humiliation still lingered, a bitter taste in Jake's mouth. "They brought that shame upon themselves," he muttered, his voice low but firm. "All I did was step in to shield a lady from harassment." Deputy Hartwell nodded, his expression heavy with understanding. "We both know the truth, Jake, but Blackwood's painting a different picture. He's been whispering poison across the territory, branding you as some reckless gunslinger stirring chaos among honest ranchers." Jake's jaw clenched, a storm brewing in his chest. Out here on the rugged frontier, a man's name was his currency, his very survival. If Blackwood's lies took root, finding work or welcome in any town could become a distant dream. "What would you have me do?" Jake asked, his tone sharp with frustration. Hartwell shifted uneasily, as though the words he carried burned his tongue. "Blackwood's made an offer. He'll let this feud die if you pack up and leave Bitter Creek for good. Never set foot here again." A sharp sound broke the air from the porch behind them, a gasp or perhaps a cry of outrage from Sarah. Jake turned, catching the fire in her eyes, a silent plea or protest that stirred something deep within him, easing the weight of his choice. "And if I stay?" he pressed, his gaze returning to Hartwell. The deputy's face darkened. "Then Blackwood's coming to town with his men to handle things himself. And you know Marcus Blackwood doesn't settle disputes with mere talk." Jake had faced such threats before, in dusty towns and forgotten conflicts. More often than not, he'd chosen the open road over bloodshed, protecting the innocent from stray bullets. But this time something anchored him. Was it pride or something more? "Tell Blackwood he knows where I stand," Jake declared, his voice resolute. Hartwell's shoulders slumped, defeat in his eyes. "Jake, you don't get it. He's got 20, maybe 30 men, tough, ruthless types. This isn't a fair fight." Jake's lips curled into a grim smile. "Since when has any fight ever been fair? A man's got to stand for something, Hartwell, or he's got nothing at all." As the dust settled from the deputy's departure, his head shaking in quiet disapproval, Jake returned to Sarah's side on the weathered porch. A heavy silence hung between them, broken only by the distant hum of the night. Sarah gazed into the blackened street, her eyes searching for something beyond Jake's sight, as if the shadows held secrets she alone could decipher. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You could have walked away, Jake. No soul would have judged you for it. You would have," he answered, the raw truth of his words catching even himself off guard. She turned to face him then, and in the soft glow spilling from the boarding house windows, he saw the shimmer of unshed tears in her eyes. "Why does my opinion weigh so much on your heart?" she pressed, her question piercing the quiet night. How could he answer? How could he unravel the tangle of emotions swelling within him, feelings too vast, too intricate for his unpolished tongue? "Somewhere along this dusty road, Sarah, your thoughts about me became the only ones that matter. I can't put it any clearer than that." Her hand reached across the gap between their chairs, finding his. Her touch was warm, tender, yet marked by the rough patches of toil proof of the resilience that had first drawn him to her. "Marcus Blackwood is a storm waiting to break, Jake. With his wealth, his influence, he bends the world to his will. Staying here could bring pain to others, to me. If you go, though, who will stand against the next band of brutes like the Maddox brothers? At least together, we might end this, once and for all." What Jake couldn't voice, what he scarcely dared to confess, even in the privacy of his own mind, was the sheer agony of imagining riding off, leaving her to face the gathering darkness alone. In mere days, she had become his anchor. In a twist of fate, Jake had found himself at the heart of a life he once deemed unimaginable, a life worth every ounce of struggle, no matter how daunting the odds. He stood ready to defend it with all he had. Just 2 days after the tension had thickened, as the sun dipped low, casting a golden haze over the jagged red rock formations encircling Bitter Creek, the inevitable struck. Jake had been vigilant, his eyes scouring the town's approaches with the sharp focus of a man whose survival hinged on detecting danger before it could close in. First, he noticed the ominous dust cloud, a murky stain against the twilight sky, billowing from the canyon road. Then, the earth itself seemed to tremble under the relentless pounding of hooves, countless horses charging with fierce intent, their thunderous rhythm a harbinger of chaos. "Sarah!" he shouted, urgency lacing his voice. She emerged at the boarding house doorway, apron in hand, her eyes meeting his with an unspoken understanding. One glance at his grim expression told her everything. "How many?" she asked, her tone resolute, though fear flickered in her gaze. Peering toward the hill, Jake counted the shadowy figures cresting into view. 15, perhaps 20 riders. Too many for just his lone pistol to fend off. Yet as despair threatened to grip him, a stirring sight unfolded along Bitter Creek's dusty main street. Doors creaked open, and familiar faces stepped forth. Samuel Wright, the weathered storekeeper, clutched a shotgun that seemed a relic of forgotten times. Pete Kowalski, once a cavalry sergeant, strode out from his barber shop, his stance unyielding. Even Deputy Hartwell, nerves etched on his face but resolve in his grip, joined them, hand steady on his revolver. "Seems you're not as isolated as you believed," Sarah remarked softly. Jake's heart swelled with a newfound hope. Could this small band of souls stand united? In mere days since his clash with the Maddox brothers, whispers of his plight had woven through the tight-knit town, binding them in silent solidarity. As the echoes of the previous confrontation lingered in the air, a startling realization dawned. There were far more souls weary of Marcus Blackwood's iron grip than anyone had dared to imagine. Suddenly, the town trembled under the thunder of hooves as a band of riders stormed in like a relentless tide of vengeance, their horses churning the earth into a suffocating veil of dust that clawed at the lungs. Leading this fearsome charge was none other than Marcus Blackwood himself, a figure Jake had only known through whispered tales, now manifest before his eyes. Far younger than the weathered tyrant Jake had pictured, Blackwood, likely in his early 40s, bore the polished sheen of privilege and dominance. His attire screamed opulence, his majestic black stallion a symbol of untouchable might, and every inch of his demeanor radiated the unyielding assurance of a man who bent the world to his will through sheer brutality. Trailing him were the notorious Maddox brothers, flanked by over a dozen others whose rugged, battle-scarred visages marked them as seasoned mercenaries. Jake knew their kind instantly, men who thrived on violence, unbound by loyalty to any town or creed, with no cause to temper their savagery. The riders fanned out into a menacing semicircle before the boarding house, their steeds snorting and pawing at the dirt, restless for conflict. A tense hush fell over the scene, broken only by the groan of leather saddles and the faint chime of spurs as the men steadied themselves. Then Blackwood's voice sliced through the stillness, sharp and commanding across the eerily silent street. "I seek a man named Jake Morrison. Word is he's been meddling with my affairs." With a steady heart, Jake descended from the porch, his hand resting lightly on his weapon. Behind him, Sarah's gasp pierced the air, but he kept his gaze locked on the formidable array before him. "That would be me," he replied, his tone a fortress of calm amidst the storm of adrenaline raging within. Could one man stand against such a tide of menace? As tension coursed through his very being, Jake stood unyielding, facing Blackwood, whose smile gleamed with the icy chill of a winter's night. "My men claim you drew first," Blackwood hissed, his voice laced with accusation. "That reeks of a man itching for bloodshed." Jake's response came steady and sharp, cutting through the heavy air. "Your men were harassing a lady who'd made her wishes for solitude abundantly clear. I merely clarified her stance for them." From the shadowed ranks of Blackwood's riders, Caleb Maddox's voice pierced the stillness, brimming with a mix of awe and defiance. "He's quick, boss, quicker than we ever imagined. But he can't stand against us all." Blackwood, with a mere flick of his hand, commanded silence, his piercing gaze locked on Jake, unblinking and predatory. "Here's your ultimatum, Morrison. Mount your horse, ride out of this land under the cover of darkness, and never dare to return. Comply, and we'll bury this grievance here and now." The weight of every eye in town bore down on Jake, a palpable force. Near the jail, Deputy Hartwell stood, his complexion ghostly, yet his resolve as firm as iron. Samuel Wright, in the threshold of his modest store, clutched an old shotgun, holding it as if it were a sacred relic. Even Pete Kowalski had positioned himself strategically, ready to unleash havoc if bullets began to fly. These townsfolk, brave souls all, were poised to defend their beliefs, to push back against the tyranny that had suffocated their lives for far too long. How could Jake do any less than stand shoulder to shoulder with them? "I can't leave," Jake declared, his voice a quiet thunder. "This is my home now." Blackwood's visage twisted into a storm of fury, his hand inching toward the ornate pistol at his side. "So be it, boys. Seize him." What followed erupted with the ferocious velocity of unleashed chaos as the Maddox brothers charged forward. As the enemy spurred their horses onward, their pistols flashed from holsters, barrels glinting with deadly intent as they stormed toward Jake's stronghold. Yet, in their reckless fury, they overlooked the silent guardians of the town, hidden in the shadows of familiar streets. From a concealed spot, Samuel Wright unleashed the roar of his shotgun, a sound like rolling thunder, striking Seth Maddox in the shoulder and hurling him from his mount with a sickening thud. At the same moment, Pete Kowalski's rifle barked sharply from the barbershop window, its echo cutting through the chaos as another of Blackwood's ruthless band fell with a pained cry, the bullet striking true. Jake's own Colt materialized in his grip as if summoned by sheer will, an extension of his very being. Without hesitation, his first shot slammed into Thomas Maddox, the youngest of the brutal clan, felling him instantly before he could even raise his weapon. His second shot tore through the elbow of a gunman aiming for Deputy Hartwell, shattering bone and resolve in a single precise strike. But the tide was overwhelming. Too many foes, too little time. In a moment of chilling clarity, Jake saw the grim truth. The town's valiant resistance teetered on the edge of becoming a bloodbath. Blackwood's remaining forces fanned out, their numbers a suffocating noose tightening around the defenders. How long could courage hold against such odds? Then, a figure emerged, Sarah Chun stepping onto the porch with her uncle's hunting rifle cradled in steady hands, her presence a quiet storm born of frontier grit. Her first shot dropped a rider attempting to flank Samuel Wright, and her second forced another of Blackwood's men to scramble behind a water trough. "Didn't I tell you to stay inside?" Jake shouted, his gaze locked on the pandemonium in the street. Sarah's response was sharp, her voice cutting through the gunfire as she worked the rifle's bolt with practiced ease. "Since when do I bow to your commands? This is my home too." The battle surged on, each second stretching into an eternity, though in truth, mere minutes had passed. As the acrid haze of gunfire finally began to dissipate, Jake surveyed the aftermath with a heavy heart. 4 of Blackwood's hired guns lay motionless in the dirt, while others clutched their wounds, their fight drained from them. Among the townsfolk, Pete Kowalski grimaced, a bullet lodged in his leg, and Samuel Wright dabbed at the blood trickling from a graze on his forehead. Yet by some miracle, every soul on their side still drew breath. In the heart of the street, Marcus Blackwood loomed atop his sleek black stallion, a figure of menace and spite. Dust clung to his once pristine, lavish attire, and his face contorted with unrestrained fury. His ornate pistol gleamed in his grip, yet he wavered, uncertain of his target. "This isn't the end, Morrison," he spat, venom lacing his words. "Next time, I'll bring 50 men. 100, if that's what it takes." Jake descended into the street, his Colt steady, aimed squarely at Blackwood's chest. "No, you won't," he countered, his voice a low, resolute murmur. "Because next time, I won't be on the defense. Next time, I'll hunt you down." There was a weight in Jake's tone, a haunting echo of battles unseen, of a resolve so fierce that even Blackwood faltered. For the first time since thundering into Bitter Creek, doubt flickered in the rancher's cold eyes. "You don't know who you're challenging," Blackwood hissed, though the bravado had bled from his words. "Oh, I know precisely who I'm facing," Jake shot back. "But do you truly understand who stands against you?" Their gazes locked, a silent war waged amidst the lingering smoke and dust. Then, with a reluctant slowness, Blackwood slid his pistol into its holster and gripped his reins. "This isn't over," he muttered, already wheeling his horse around. "It's over when I declare it so." Jake called after him, his voice unyielding. "And if you dare send your men to torment this town again, I'll end it for good." As Blackwood and his dwindling band rode out of Bitter Creek, their figures fading into the horizon, the weight of Jake's promise hung in the air like a storm yet to break. As the oppressive shadows of dusk settled over Bitter Creek, mirroring the terror of the ordeal they had endured, Jake finally exhaled a shuddering breath. The storm of violence had passed, yet he felt the weight of transformation in the air. What transpired today would not fade into silence. Its echoes would reverberate across the territory, stirring unseen waves of consequence. At his side, Sarah materialized, her rifle now resting loosely in her grip, no longer poised for battle. Her voice trembled with lingering fear as she asked, "Do you think he'll return?" Jake pondered her words, his mind sifting through memories of men like Marcus Blackwood, ruthless souls who neither forgave nor forgot, yet shied from fights lacking guaranteed triumph. Today's clash had shattered Blackwood's illusion of an effortless conquest. "Perhaps," Jake murmured after a heavy pause, "but not soon. And should he dare to return, we'll stand united against him." Sarah's lips curved into a smile, the first true spark of warmth Jake had witnessed since Blackwood's shadow darkened their horizon. "We," she echoed, her tone a mix of hope and challenge. Jake hesitated, vulnerability creeping into his voice. "If you'll stand with me, if this town will accept me. I know I've dragged trouble to your doorstep." Before doubt could fully claim him, Sarah rose on her toes, silencing his uncertainty with a kiss that burned with gratitude and relief. Right there, in the heart of the street, under the watchful eyes of Bitter Creek survivors, their embrace whispered of a deeper bond, a fragile dream of a future neither had dared to envision mere days ago. When they parted, Jake felt an unshakable truth settle within him. His days of wandering were done. In Bitter Creek, he had stumbled upon a purpose he hadn't sought, a cause worth defending, a home worth cherishing. As the townsfolk emerged from their barricades, tending to the injured and beginning the arduous task of rebuilding, Jake Morrison gazed upon the community with newfound resolve, as had stood shoulder to shoulder with those he'd fought to protect, and for the first time in his weathered adult years, Jake Morrison felt the deep, unshakable warmth of belonging, of truly being home. Yet as the echoes of that fierce gunfight, now whispered as legend across the Arizona territory, lingered in the air, a darker shadow crept over his newfound peace. 3 weeks later, Jake found himself perched on the jagged ridge above Devil's Canyon, his gaze fixed on the ghostly tendrils of smoke curling upward from the charred remains of the Hendricks homestead. A shiver coursed through him, not from the sight of devastation alone, but from the chilling truth it unveiled. Marcus Blackwood's ominous vow that he was far from done rang truer than ever. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. A handful of cattle vanished from the remote ranches. Supplies inexplicably slipped away from wagons, trudging along the canyon trail. Fences were severed under the cover of night, freeing livestock to stray into the merciless desert, most never to return. Each act, taken alone, might have been dismissed as the petty chaos of the untamed frontier. But Jake saw through the veil. This was no random mischief. It was Blackwood's venomous retaliation for his disgrace at Bitter Creek, a calculated siege meant to choke the life from the town until its people crumbled, pleading for his twisted mercy. Such cunning patience, such ruthless precision, how had Jake underestimated the depth of this man's menace? The obliteration of the Hendricks homestead shattered any lingering doubt. John Hicks, a resolute German immigrant, had staked his claim on a modest quarter section, defiantly planting roots in land Blackwood deemed his own. Unyielding, John spurned every offer to sell, brushed aside every threat, determined to cultivate his dream no matter the cost. Now that dream lay in ashes. John, his wife Mary, and their 2 tender children were gone, their lives snuffed out, their bodies discovered amidst the smoldering ruins of their cabin. Deputy Hartwell might have stamped it as a tragic accident, a mere fire gone awry, but Jake's eyes saw the sinister hand behind the flames. Could anyone truly believe this was mere chance, when every sign screamed of calculated cruelty? As the echoes of destruction lingered in the bullet-riddled remnants of shattered walls, it became painfully clear this was no longer mere chaos, but a brutal, undeniable war. Jake urged his horse onward toward Bitter Creek, the sinking sun casting a haunting glow across the desert. its crimson and amber hues mirroring the blood and flames that seared his memory. How could beauty and horror intertwine so cruelly? His loyal mare, Ismar Duchess, tread cautiously along the jagged path, her ears twitching with every rustle, alert to the whispers of danger lurking in the shadows. When Jake reached Bitter Creek, an eerie stillness gripped the town. The streets, usually bustling with life, lay desolate, with only a handful of souls daring to linger. Many shops had shuttered early, their windows dark and unwelcoming. The grim news of the Hendricks family's fate had swept through like wildfire, igniting a fear so thick it seemed to hang in the air. These were folks who had once defied Blackwood with fierce bravery, standing tall when the odds were stacked against them. Yet they were also grounded in harsh reality, knowing full well that valor alone might not shield their loved ones from harm. Sarah awaited him on the boarding house porch, her face ashen yet resolute, a beacon of quiet strength. In the tumultuous weeks since the gunfight, their bond had grown into something unshakable, as enduring as the towering red rock formations encircling the town. They had whispered of marriage, of carving out a life in Bitter Creek, of dreaming a future that once seemed an impossible fantasy. "You saw it," she murmured, her words not a question, but a heavy truth. Jake nodded, sliding off Duchess and securing her to the post. Blackwood's delivering a warning: bow to his will or suffer the Hendricks fate. Yeah. But what defiance will we hurl back at him? In the flickering lamplight, he gazed into Sarah's eyes, seeing the tremor of fear, yet also the unyielding resolve that had first captured his heart. She understood his thoughts, sensed his unspoken plans, and though dread shadowed her, she did not falter. Following the tense silence of their last exchange, Jake's voice dropped to a hushed murmur, carrying the weight of a solemn truth. "Some causes are worth the ultimate sacrifice," he confided, his words heavy with unspoken resolve. What he held back, what he couldn't bear to voice, was the desperate plan forming in his mind to ride out into the night, alone, toward Blackwood's ranch. This wasn't about guarding the town anymore. It was a bold, reckless strike to sever the root of their torment once and for all. A mission so perilous, soldiers would whisper of it as a death sentence. Yet Jake refused to drag anyone else into this abyss. He would bear the burden solo, shielding the brave souls of Bitter Creek who had once fought by his side. But Sarah Chun, hardened by 2 decades on the unforgiving frontier, could read the shadowed intentions of men like Jake with chilling clarity. "You're going after him by yourself, aren't you?" she asked, her tone unwavering, even as tears glistened in her eyes. Betraying her fear, Jake wrestled with the urge to deceive her, to weave a tale of mere defense and strategy. But no, Sarah deserved the raw, unvarnished truth, especially in this fragile moment. "Someone must," he replied, his voice stripped of pretense, "and I'm the only one with the means to see it through." A long, aching silence stretched between them. Sarah gazed out at the darkened street, as if the dust and gloom held the blueprint of their fate. When she spoke again, her whisper was so faint that Jake had to lean closer to catch it. "The means," she echoed, her words piercing. "You mean the ability to kill, don't you?" A cold dread coiled in Jake's gut. In all their talks these past weeks, he had danced around the ghosts of his past, the blood-stained years before Bitter Creek. Yet Sarah, with her sharp mind and piercing gaze, had always seen through the veil. How could she not? As the weight of the past lingered in the air from their earlier exchange, Jake felt the piercing gaze of Sarah's unspoken questions. "Who were you truly before you rode into my life, Jake?" Her words, though gentle, cut deep, stirring a storm within him. For a fleeting moment, he thought of sidestepping the inquiry, of burying the raw truth beneath a veneer of distraction. Yet, with the shadow of tomorrow's ride against Blackwood looming, perhaps a ride from which he might never return, honesty clawed its way to the surface. Sarah deserved to know the man she had given her heart to. "I was a soldier," he confessed, his voice rough with the burden of memory. "Captain Jake Morrison of the 5th Cavalry Regiment. 3 brutal years I spent clashing with Apaches in these very lands, and 2 more locked in battle against Confederate irregulars during the war." Sarah listened, her face a mask of calm, yet Jake could sense the gears turning in her mind, fragments of his enigma snapping into place. "A cavalry officer," she murmured, almost to herself. "That's why you stand so tall, why you face the Maddox brothers with such unshakable resolve. But what haunts your eyes when you speak of Blackwood?" Jake shut his eyes, the ghosts of yesteryear pressing down like a leaden sky. "After the war, I remained in the army. Apaches still resisted in the southern reaches, and Confederate remnants stirred unrest. My superiors tasked me with covert operations, missions that never graced official ledgers. Her voice, barely a whisper, trembled with curiosity. What kind of missions? The kind where men vanished into the night, he admitted, each word a stone in his chest. Problems erased, silently, permanently. No trials, no witnesses, no troubling questions of justice. Sarah sat motionless, a chasm widening between them, palpable and cold. Jake had always known this revelation would alter her gaze upon him, yet the sting of it was sharper than any blade. "How many lives did you snuff out, Jake?" Her question lingered, heavy as fate itself, unanswered in the fragile silence. The silence hung heavy between them, curling like the faint wisps of smoke from a fire long extinguished. Jake had lost track of the number long ago, after the first dozen or so, forcing himself to see his targets as mere obstacles to overcome, not as people with loved ones, aspirations, and trembling fears. It was the only shield he had against the madness that threatened to consume him in those bleak, endless years following the war. "Too many," he murmured at last, his voice a fragile thread. "More than any heart should bear." "And that's why you walked away from the army, because the burden grew too heavy to shoulder?" Sarah's question pierced the quiet, and Jake could only nod, his throat tight with unspoken pain. Leaving behind his commission, vanishing into the untamed expanse of the frontier, had been the most grueling decision of his life. Yet it was the sole path to salvage the tattered remnants of his spirit. Sarah fell silent, and Jake braced himself for the moment he dreaded most, when she would see the stains of his past and ask him to go, realizing she couldn't tether her future to a man drenched in so much blood. But instead, she shattered his expectations. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she whispered, her voice tender as a caress. "I know that couldn't have been easy." Jake stared at her, disbelief etched into his weathered face. "You're not afraid of me? Of the things I've done?" Sarah's smile, though tinged with sorrow, bloomed like a fragile light in the surrounding gloom. "Jake Morrison, in the short weeks I've known you, I've seen you throw yourself into danger for strangers, toil through grueling 18-hour days for folks you hardly know, and show my uncle a warmth most reserved for their own kin. Whatever horrors you faced in the war, whatever mask you wore to endure, that's not the man standing before me now." The wave of relief that crashed over Jake was almost too much to bear, a tide washing away years of silent guilt. How could he have doubted her compassion? How could he have thought she'd turn away from the man he was striving to become? Following the raw intensity of their recent confrontation, Jake found himself wrestling with a storm of emotions he hadn't felt in ages. For so long, he had wandered through life shrouded in solitude, convinced that no one could ever embrace the shadowed corners of his soul. Yet here was Sarah, standing resolute before him, her gaze a beacon in his darkness. "I'm not letting you face tomorrow alone," she declared, her voice imbued with a steely resolve that Jake had come to recognize as unshakable. "Sarah, this battle isn't yours to wage. If harm came to you because of me—" His words trailed off, heavy with unspoken dread, but Sarah cut through his hesitation like a blade. "This became my war the instant Marcus Blackwood deemed families like the Hendricks disposable," she countered fiercely, "and it turned personal the moment he threatened the man I cherish." That word love lingered between them, more potent than any gunfire that had erupted during their harrowing clash 3 weeks prior. It was a truth neither had dared to voice until now, and it struck Jake with a force that unraveled something deep within him, a long-sealed chamber of his heart, blooming under a tender, unexpected rain. "I love you too," he rasped, emotion roughening his tone. "That's precisely why I can't allow—" But Sarah silenced his protest with a kiss, a fierce blend of coffee bitterness and unyielding resolve, echoing the bold spirit that forged the untamed frontier. "We face this together," she breathed as they parted, her eyes alight with conviction. "Or we don't face it at all." For the next hour, Jake poured out every reason he could muster: the perilous odds, the near certainty of death, the ruthless mercenaries guarding Blackwood's ranch who wouldn't spare a thought for her safety. Sarah absorbed his pleas with quiet patience, only to dismantle each argument with the sharp, unassailable reasoning honed by a life shaped on the rugged edge of civilization. How could he deny her strength, her heart, when it mirrored the very fire that kept him fighting? continuing from the perilous edge of the frontier, where women brave horrors that would shatter the resolve of men from gentler lands. Sarah's voice broke the tense silence. At last, she spoke with quiet determination. "You'll need someone to guard your flank, someone who knows the wild terrain around Blackwood's ranch. Far better than you ever could." Her words struck a chord of undeniable truth. Jake had surveyed the paths leading to Blackwood's stronghold, but Sarah was woven into the very fabric of this rugged land. She had roamed its hidden canyons as a child, knew every scarce spring of water, every obscure trail where they might slip unseen toward their enemy. Jake's gaze hardened as he relented. "If we're to do this, it's on my terms. We follow military precision, absolute discipline. When I issue a command, there's no room for hesitation. Do you understand?" Sarah's nod was grave, her voice steady as she replied, "I understand. But Jake, when this storm passes, when Blackwood's shadow no longer looms over us, I need a vow from you." His brow furrowed. "What is it?" Her eyes pleaded as she spoke. "Swear to me you'll lay down your weapons, that will forge a life untouched by bloodshed, free from the constant dread of danger lurking behind us." Looking into Sarah's earnest gaze, Jake glimpsed a dream he'd long buried, a serene existence, perhaps tending the boarding house side by side, nurturing a family, aging gracefully in a community that cherished and sheltered them. Could such peace truly be within reach for a man scarred by his past? "I swear it," he declared, the promise resonating from the depths of his soul. Through the waning hours of night, they pored over Sarah's hand-sketched maps, her memories guiding their strategy. Jake's battle-hardened mind pinpointed fortifications, charted fallback paths, and tallied their meager supplies. As the first light of dawn crept closer, their plan took shape, forged in quiet resolve. As the eastern horizon bloomed with hues of delicate gold and tender blush, Jake and Sarah steeled themselves for the journey ahead. Jake meticulously inspected his arsenal, ensuring his pistol gleamed with readiness, his rifle's aim was true, and his supply of bullets could withstand the unknown perils they might face. Meanwhile, Sarah gathered their essentials with a quiet intensity, stuffing saddlebags with medical kits for unforeseen injuries, and enough water to sustain them through the merciless desert expanse. They slipped away from Bitter Creek under the veil of dawn, before the town stirred to life. Their path set southward toward the jagged silhouette of distant mountains, where Marcus Blackwood's reign of fear and brutality loomed. Behind them, the rising sun bathed the crimson rock formations in a fiery glow, as though the very land pulsed with the fervor of their mission. Their journey to Blackwood's stronghold consumed the day, tracing hidden game trails and parched riverbeds to shield themselves from prying eyes. They paused often, granting respite to their weary mounts and surveying the rugged terrain with wary precision. Every step was measured, every breath deliberate, for they knew a single misstep could spell their doom. As they neared their target, Jake felt the old familiar mantle of battle readiness settle over him, wrapping him in its grim comfort. His senses sharpened to a razor's edge, attuned to every rustle and shadow in the desolate expanse. How could he have forgotten this electric thrill, this heightened state of being? Beside him, Sarah rode with an unshakable poise, a daughter of this unforgiving wilderness, her rifle poised across her saddle, her gaze ever vigilant for threats. Watching her, Jake's heart swelled with a fierce admiration, yet trembled with dread at the audacity of their endeavor. What madness drove them to challenge such a tyrant? Blackwood's ranch house loomed ahead, a dark sentinel in the fading light. Nestled in a shallow valley cradled by two modest hills, a vast adobe stronghold loomed, encircled by weathered corrals, ramshackle outbuildings, and rough-hewn bunkhouses. From their distant vantage point, Jake's keen eyes tracked the restless movements of armed men weaving through the compound. He tallied at least a dozen horses pawing the dust in the central corral, a stark reminder of their dire odds outnumbered 6-1, perhaps worse. "There's still a chance to turn back," he murmured, his voice a quiet thread of doubt in the still air. Sarah's gaze met his, a tender yet frustrated spark flickering in her eyes. "Jake Morrison, if you dare ask me that again, I swear I'll pull the trigger on you myself." Despite the gravity of their plight, a faint smile tugged at Jake's lips. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, a whisper of warmth in his tone. As the sun dipped below the rugged western peaks, painting the desert in long, mournful shadows, Jake and Sarah Chun steeled themselves for the most perilous night of their existence. They lingered in the twilight, waiting for darkness to cloak the valley entirely, their eyes fixed on the patterns of Blackwood's guards. Every movement, every lapse, was etched into their minds. Jake's years in the military shone through as he pinpointed the cracks in the patrol routines, the unseen corners, the fleeting moments of vulnerability. "There," he breathed, gesturing to a parched creek bed snaking along the eastern boundary of the estate. "That wash will shield us, get us within 50 yards of the main house undetected." Sarah peered through his field glasses, her expression grave under the faint glimmer of starlight. "And the guards by the bunkhouse. Their shift changes at midnight, doesn't it?" she asked. "For 3 fleeting minutes, that area's unwatched. That's our moment to strike." Their plan, though deceptively straightforward, bristled with harrowing intricacy. Under the cover of the guard change, they would slip into the heart of the compound, creep toward the main house where Blackwood slumbered, and face him head-on. Jake harbored no false hopes about the dangers ahead. How could he, with the weight of their mission pressing down like the desert night itself? The inevitable clash loomed on the horizon, a storm ready to break. Men like Marcus Blackwood never yielded, never bargained, never offered quarter when backed into a corner. This battle would be a brutal reckoning, a fight to the bitter end, and Jake was resolute. He would not be the one to fall. As the clock neared 11:30, they embarked on their perilous descent, guiding their horses into the dry creek bed with the stealth of phantoms gliding over the desolate desert expanse. Each footfall was measured, every gesture precise, for even the faintest whisper of noise could unleash Blackwood's ruthless horde upon them. Sarah moved at his side, a wraith in the moonlight, her frontier-hardened skills rendering her steps soundless across the unforgiving terrain. Jake couldn't help but marvel anew at her prowess, her bravery, her ironclad resolve to see this grim mission through. How could one woman embody such fierce strength and quiet grace? They arrived at the perimeter fence precisely at midnight, coinciding with the guard rotation. Jay sliced through the wire with practiced finesse, while Sarah stood sentinel, rifle poised, her eyes scanning the darkness. For 3 agonizing minutes, stretching into what felt like endless hours, they were utterly exposed, a mere glance away from disaster. Yet fortune favored them, and they slipped through the breach just as the new sentries settled into place. Ahead, the ranch house hulked against the star-strewn sky, a menacing shadow. Faint light seeped from the edges of thick curtains, likely Blackwood's study, and the murmur of voices drifted across the compound. "He's still awake," Sarah breathed, her voice barely a whisper. Jake's jaw tightened as he nodded. "Good. I want him to look into my eyes when the end comes." They inched forward across the exposed ground, cloaking themselves in shadows and using outbuildings as shields. With every cautious step, they drew nearer to the fateful confrontation, the moment that would seal not only their destinies, but the very future of all they fought for. As the shadows of Bitter Creek enveloped everyone, Jake and Sarah crept closer to the looming wall of the main house. Under the cloak of night, Jake paused, turning to Sarah with a heart heavy yet resolute. In the dimness, her face was a faint outline, but the fierce determination in her eyes burned through the darkness. "No matter what unfolds inside," he murmured, his voice a tender thread in the still air, "know that these fleeting weeks with you have been the brightest of my days." Sarah's hand reached up, her touch a soft caress against his weathered cheek. "Then let's fight for countless more," she replied, her words a vow woven with hope. Despite the looming danger, a faint smile tugged at Jake's lips. "Yes, ma'am," he breathed, a quiet promise. Together they edged toward the front door, weapons poised, pulses racing with the certainty that the next fleeting moments would reshape their destinies. Behind them, the boundless desert sprawled into eternity, its ancient stars gazing down, unmoved by the human struggles below. Ahead loomed Marcus Blackwood, the harbinger of a final clash that would decide if justice or tyranny would reign over this rugged slice of Arizona territory. Jake Morrison, long a fugitive from his own history, felt the weight of his past lift tonight. Here he would stand, not just for himself, but for the woman who had captured his heart and the community that offered him a shot at salvation. As his hand gripped the door handle, a profound calm washed over him. Win or lose, was he not precisely where fate intended? The door swung open on silent, oiled hinges, and together Jake and Sarah stepped into the jaws of uncertainty, ready to confront whatever darkness awaited. Dear viewers, from the depths of my heart, thank you for joining us on this gripping journey. Your presence means the world. I urge you to share your thoughts in the comments, Hit that like button if this story touched you, share it with kindred spirits, and subscribe to our channel for more tales that stir the soul. Let's keep this adventure alive together.